Hey guys, Wormeck here, bringing you another look at Path of Exile. Now I know what you're saying, Wormeck, you already did a wormhole for this. Why are you looking at it again? Well, it's mostly because I've been playing this again recently, so I've kind of been learning a little bit more about it, and at this point I've actually put in a good number of hours into the game. So I wanted to revisit as there's a little bit more complexity to the game than my initial impressions kind of might have given the impression of, which is of course the purpose of our first impression. So revisiting it here, some main stuff has changed. There's a new update that just came out called the Sacrifice of the Veil, or Val, never really sure. And that has brought with it a new ladder. So last time we took a look at some of the previous versions. So you had the standard ladders as well as the hardcore ladders, and there's always a special one every 4 months. If you haven't already checked out that video, you can check it out now. There's an annotation on the top right of your screen, and it's been there since the beginning of the video, so you probably noticed it. And yeah, so along with that, I wanted to take a look at the way that that's kind of laid out. So the new ladders brought with them 2 new leagues. The first is Ambush, which is the new standard league, which has a couple of new things, including strong boxes that contain ambushing monsters. And the strong boxes have random stats, and they can be magic and rare, and all kinds of special things can happen with those. And it also brought corrupt areas. Now those corrupt areas do have a little bit of specialness to them, as the entire area will have some kind of special words affecting it. Kind of like an item, they'll have affixes and suffixes, so it can mean better loot, it can mean worse things are happening, you can have a really easy time or a really hard time, but they always have some kind of a special boss monster at the end of them that is designed to just kind of kick your ass a little bit. And his main purpose is just to guard this corrupt Veil gem. So if you don't recall, skill gems in this game are essentially how you actually get your equipment. Not your equipment, your skills. As you can see, you get the little colored gems, and each one does something. There's support gems that modify skills that are linked via one of these little kind of chain things here. And then there's actual skills. You also have auras like the hatred that I'm using here, which gives me cold damage to me and all my allies. It's kind of a main focus of my build, is just kind of ranged pew-pewing guys while using auras to support the team. And so, yeah, those corrupted skill gems are similar to the normal ones. In fact, they're all based off of a normal skill gem, but they all have something special about them. So there's a corrupt fireball that, instead of shooting a single little dinky fireball like you would expect to see, it instead shoots 32 fireballs in a big circle around you and kind of blows up everything. And you're probably wondering, how is it in any way balanced? And that's a good question, but Grinding Gear Games thought of that. What they've done is they made it so that instead of using your mana or health or anything like that to activate these skills, you use souls. And souls are obtained by killing enemies. So as you kill enemies, you will be able to activate your skills a variable number of times. Generally it's 1 time per corrupted skill gem. Some of them are a little bit more, so there's that. And I'm actually just going to stick that in because that's a really good gem. I'm going to mix this up now and take this out for that to there and that to there. So now my burning arrow, which is my single target damage, does some extra physical damage. But it shoots slower, so not a huge amount slower it looks like, so that's pretty good. Anywho, so yeah, so you get souls, and that lets you activate your actual skills, and those skills then are very powerful as a result. So since you can only use it a certain number of times and you can't just kind of spam it, it greatly limits what you can actually do with it. So it kind of saves it to be more of like a, oh look at that cool attack kind of thing, or to clear out like a single troublesome pack of enemies rather than just mowing down everything with it. So that's pretty neat. The other league that they added is the Invasion League, which is the hardcore league for this ladder rank tier. I don't know what you'd call it exactly, ladder. And I may do some videos showing that off, as it's kind of an interesting idea. I'll probably die a ton during it, so you get to look forward to that. But essentially what Invasion is that the enemies in each of the acts are not randomized, but you can get attacked by enemies from other acts. Essentially you'll get someone that visits you quote unquote, and they will just kind of show up, and you'll be fighting enemies from Act 3, for example, in Act 1. So that just sounds like a recipe for disaster when if your character dies, you are not dead, because this game's a little bit more generous than that, but your character is no longer a hardcore character and is instead just a boring standard league character that no one cares about. So look forward to that in the future. That's probably coming in the next couple of weeks or so. And we have to fight the named boss here. I've already gone through this area before. I've actually beat this difficulty already. I'm just kind of showing it off a little bit more, since it's easier to talk and focus when I'm not getting murdered by everything. Now, the other thing that has changed is that I'm a little bit more knowledgeable about the game now, so there's a little bit more to it than first kind of appeared. A lot of the stuff is fairly obvious, and the biggest thing is the skill tree. So the skill tree, if you don't remember, is this great big honking thing. The key things to kind of learn from this, and this is something that you kind of learn over making multiple characters, is to kind of have at least a concept of your character. A lot of people say that you really need to look up builds. I generally disagree with that. I looked up some things for this, so I had a general idea of what was actually good, since I didn't want to ruin this character too much, since it's the first one in the ladder. But I'm not following super closely a guide for it. So I wanted my character to be focused on bows, and as I mentioned, I like auras because I like supporting the team, so I'm going along this path here, which gives me a bunch of arrow-based things and some decks. And always try and get some life nodes when you can, since that is a huge benefit and is not as obvious as it would seem sometimes. You might think, hey, I'm doing good, I can kill everything really well, but then you'll find a boss, and that boss doesn't die in a couple hits, and he will just wreck your shit. It's pretty obscene, actually, how fast that can happen, and you might not even see it coming, so be prepared, grab your life nodes. Only get damage nodes, obviously if you don't have anything else to get and you're kind of working towards something, or if your damage is actually needed. If you're already like one-shotting or almost one-shotting things, don't really worry about getting more damage. It's not going to make that much of a difference. It's much more important to be able to survive a couple hits when something surprises you or when a boss comes and gets you. Now, the enemies you're seeing here, this is an Act 3 area, so they're a little bit more interesting and diverse, and generally a lot less pleasant to look at than the earlier ones where it's more just typical zombies and that kind of thing. And, you know, that's kind of the gist of it. The main stuff I've also noticed is that in my original video I kind of regret not having advanced to the bosses first, the actual act bosses that is, because they are pretty much all, from what I've seen, or all of them actually since I've completed all the acts at least once, are very, very interesting. They're designed in a way that makes it so that there's a lot more complexity to it than you would expect in an action game like this. It almost feels like, if you played Diablo 3, you kind of will have an idea of what I'm talking about, but they feel almost like raid bosses if you've played World of Warcraft or any other MMOs. They've got a little bit of kind of mechanics to pay attention to. For example, there's one boss that I will not name for the sake of spoilers, but that involves summoning these elemental kind of portals on the floor. There's fire portals and ice portals, and the boss will activate one to become either this amazing Amazon goddess or a whirling fire she-devil, and it basically changes up the style. Now you can actually kill the portals, so you can kind of choose which one she'll focus on actually getting as a result of only trying to kill one or the other, or you can try and kill them all and pretty much spend the entire fight trying to do that and probably not doing very well. But if you're in a group, it's kind of nice if you have someone on kind of the portal duty to clear those out, and then someone else is handling the actual boss, or you all just kind of share the duties and that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of mechanics involved there. The last boss in the game has a lot of different phases with different enemy types and a lot of different things to kind of learn through, and certain enemies are easier as certain types of characters. For example, ranged characters do really well against this guy that whirlwinds everywhere because he's really slow while he's whirlwinding, and they don't take damage from shooting him from far away. So there's a lot of kind of nice planning of that, and it feels like the bosses actually have a lot of thought put into them, which is pretty cool given that the company that made this is a pretty small company, and I'm glad to see that they put in some cool effort into that. I also really like the lighting effects in this game. I didn't get a chance to really notice them in the original video. I'm playing on higher graphics settings now, but you can kind of see nice little shadowing effects all over the place as you kind of run around. The dynamic lighting is very nice, and you get a little bit of that as well when you go near torches. The torches will actually turn on. The liquid effects are not the most beautiful, but I mean, this is supposed to be blood, so it kind of gets the point across. It's pretty disgusting. And other than that, there's a couple other things that I learned mechanically about this game that are not super obvious. There's actually a lot of things in this game I find that are not particularly obvious to a new player. The key one, of course, will have to do with your stats. That being specifically your chance to evade and your accuracy. So under offense, you have a chance to hit here. I'm at 95% right now. That almost doesn't matter because the chance to hit is based on your accuracy stat. And your accuracy stat only affects chance to hit. Now, you're probably thinking that doesn't make any sense. Of course it would. What else would it do? But the thing is that you have this other stat, chance to evade, which is evasion. That directly counters your accuracy and vice versa. So enemies will have an accuracy stat and an evasion stat like players do, and if your accuracy is higher than their evasion, then you have a better chance of hitting them. Now, why does that not matter? Well, the thing to bear in mind is that each of the different stats, I guess you could say, or different character classes, has kind of different gear that's geared towards them. So if you are strength, you get armor primarily on your equipment. If you are intelligence based, you get energy shield, which is kind of like a little buff that you have that's like an extra health pool before your actual health pool takes damage. And if you are dex based, you have evasion. Now there's mixes and matches and stuff. You can get like this here's armor and evasion. I think it's the only example. Armor, evasion, energy shield, and there's also the other combinations that are all there. Why that's important is that if you have something that gives you a lot of evasion, like for example my ranger here, it gets primarily evasion gear. Evasion does not actually give you a chance to not die. It basically makes it so that a percentage of the attacks will not hit you. Now, you're probably thinking that's, of course, what evasion does, that's what a chance to evade is, but the way that this game does it is it doesn't re-roll your chance to evade on every attack, which is very important to understand, because what that means is if you have a 50% chance to evade and you don't get hit by an attack, the next attack is guaranteed to hit you. It is not a 50% chance on each attack to not get hit. It's a 50% overall to not get hit. So if you have 80%, 4 attacks will hit you, then you'll dodge 1, and so on. That's very important to understand because it doesn't mean that you can avoid all the attacks. So having a really high evasion doesn't guarantee that you won't ever be hit. It just means that you'll be hit once, really, really hard, because you don't have armor to reduce the damage that you take. And that's the main thing that armor does, is it just reduces physical damage that you take. In the skill tree, a lot of evasion-based characters, myself included, take this skill, Iron Reflexes, which, as you can see here, converts all your evasion rating to armor. That means that instead of getting the evasion rating that makes me harder to hit individually, I instead get a buttload of actual armor. So that's why I have 1,174 armor when I don't have a single armor piece on. It's giving me a 47% reduction to all physical damage, but I have almost no chance to evade attacks. To me, that's greatly preferable, and most Path of Exile players seem to agree, simply because it's much better to be able to be hit easily but not take damage from it, rather than get hit half the time and get one shot by it. So it doesn't really have any long-term sustainability on its own. You can kind of manage it if you get armor and evasion gear and kind of mix and match it a little bit or focus more on one over the other. But ultimately, evasion has its flaws, and that's kind of a critical issue with the evasion classes. Obviously, grinding gear games recognizes that, otherwise they wouldn't have put that talent in there, that passive, as it's kind of a strange thing that kind of stands out as it completely converts the entire purpose of the armor itself to a different type of armor that is kind of considered to be a bit more usable. But it also does make sense on its own to an extent, simply because there are classes that are melee based that use evasion, which makes sense for them to want to get some extra armor to soak more damage. But by and large, that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to cover here. So I'll be taking a look at the hardcore mode, the invasion mode, shortly. I may actually do that with a friend of mine too, depending on if he's interested. So we'll take a look at that, and you guys can watch me die terribly. We'll go through the builds all together and kind of discuss the planning and the reasoning behind it, so we'll be able to get more of a kind of a complete understanding of what is going on. Obviously, I've just been kind of killing things in the background here, which doesn't really explain anything about how my character was built or the thought process or anything like that. But that's not really what the point of this video was. I just wanted to kind of show off some of the cool things that this game has added and kind of give you some insight into kind of the more advanced things that you can kind of do. One thing I also didn't really mention in the original video is that there is actually an end game to this as well, and I just looped all the way to back to the beginning. This whole loop, that's a troll loop right there. So yeah, end game, there are these maps that you can get that have random affixes and suffixes that will affect these areas, kind of like those corrupted portals that I mentioned earlier. And with those, you can essentially farm loot almost indefinitely, and you can get some that are really cool. They're designed to be group content, so you can bring some buddies along and have some good loot fun clearing all that out. And yeah, so that's kind of the overall goal of the end game. There's a lot you can kind of do with that. There's 3 difficulties, of course, standard for action RPGs, nothing really revolutionary there. And yeah, the currency systems in the game are also pretty in-depth. I don't believe I really talked about that very much in the original video, but there's a number of different currencies like the Orb of Augmentation. I did mention there was no gold in the game, but these actually have a lot of practical uses. There's some really neat ones that upgrade things directly to rares, change the number of sockets on an item, change the color of the sockets so you can fit different skill gems in it, change the number of links. There's some that remove all the bonuses from an item, which you might think at first doesn't make sense to do, but you can do that and then use other items that will change it into a rare instead if it was only a magic item, or potentially even get it into a legendary if you're lucky. So there's a lot of kind of customization and thought and a lot of stuff that you can do to kind of improve yourself. It doesn't seem so far to be super grindy. There's obviously a little element of grind, as it is an action RPG, and there's not really any way to make a game like that without, you know, having any kind of grind, as you do have to get gear and that kind of stuff. But they didn't do it in kind of an abusive way to the players. It's very fair. Overall, the game is very well designed. I love the aesthetic of the areas. The enemies are very varied. Each of the acts actually has incredibly different enemies for the most part. There's not a lot of reused models or textures. These particular enemies here are unique to this map. You don't see any of them except the blood guys. The blood elementals, you do see some other kind of elementals in some other areas sometimes. But I guess we can forgive them that, since it is an elemental and not some kind of special monster that wouldn't make sense to be elsewhere. But yeah, there you go. So that's our second look at Path of Exile. If you want to check that out, you can check it out on their website or on Steam. It's already available. It's a free-to-play game by Grinding Gear Games. Do check it out. It's a blast. And that's Wormeck heading out. So I'm just going to try and go for it right here. And Rambo turret saves the day. So I'm fairly certain that's not how you're supposed to actually have done that.